Okay, so you cheated on the carnivore diet or any diet really. And now the hard part, the most terrible thing happens. You are having trouble getting back on track. That is what happened to me. And so I sat down and I was like, what would make sticking to the diet I want easier? And I came up with 6 things that will make getting back on track and staying on track easier. If you don't know me, my name is Echo, and I create content about how a normal, everyday, average person can work through their problems, put in the work, and see great results. So let's get to work. Think about your threshold of change. Okay, so what is the threshold of change? Basically, the threshold of change means the amount of change that you can handle before you start sliding back into where you were before you made all the changes. Why is this important to think about? Well, because oftentimes we mistake our desire to change with our ability to change. That means that we can greatly overestimate the amount of change we can maintain before we slide back where we used to be. The reason why it's important to think about your threshold of change before you jump back into whatever diet you are wanting to try, whatever you are doing, is because your threshold of change might change what you are doing. For me, this might mean that I need to evaluate if carnivore is something that I can maintain or if I'm going to continue to have these mistakes and it's something that I need to work up to. So working up to where you want to be is not a bad thing. It is just understanding that there are steps that you have to take to get where you want to go. For me, this might mean that my carnivore might be like, well, I'm going to start 1 meal a day is going to be carnivore. Maybe 2 meals a day is going to be carnivore. Maybe it means that I will try doing keto and seeing if I can transition from keto to ketovore to carnivore. We want to think that we can jump in at the highest level of difficulty. But when we jump in at the highest level of difficulty, it's actually hard to maintain. So thinking about our threshold of change, our capacity to change and where we are right now can affect how well we are going to do at maintaining that particular change. That is why you should start here first. I know it's not something that we think about a lot because we want to get right back where we were. We have these great ambitions that we're like going to be able to do it and jump in and everything is going to be great, and then something happens and you know what? It's not great. So if you think about what you are capable of doing consistently, then it'll save you the heartache of feeling like you are constantly starting over and over again. The next thing that I am going to work on is stopping the tomorrow mentality. And the tomorrow mentality is something that I had never heard of before, but it is something that I have been doing for a long time. And that is telling myself that tomorrow will be the day. Tomorrow will be when I get everything together. And you know what? Tomorrow it doesn't work because tomorrow it never gets here. If you want to see real change, you need to quit putting that change off till tomorrow and think that what I do today is the most important, because it is easy to get stuck in that tomorrow loop. And by that tomorrow loop, I mean every day I would wake up and then I would mess up. And I was thinking, well, the day is shot. I might as well enjoy it. I would tell myself, you know what? There is always tomorrow. And I tomorrowed myself into weeks. I tomorrowed myself into months. And thinking of things that way, thinking if I mess up, that the entire day is blown, is not helping me. It's not helping me create something. It's not being a sustainable habit. And so I actually decided that I was going to change the way I thought about it. The way I decided to change this was to think about the day in a 24-hour increment. And this actually happened because I was watching a movie. And in this movie, the main character was attending an AA meeting. And while they were attending this AA meeting, there was somebody who was celebrating their 3-year anniversary. And so they all celebrated, but then the person leading it turned around and was like, okay, I need to know if there's anybody new. I need to know if there is anybody that is celebrating their first 24 hours. And thinking of that, like something changed in my head. It suddenly made sense. And I was like, 24 hours. That is a great way to think of it, because I always think of a day as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I go through the days and I'm like, if I make a mistake, that entire day is done for and I might as well start tomorrow. But when you think of a day as 24 hours long, 24 hours can start at any time during the day. And so I looked over at the clock and I was like, okay, 9:47. If I can make it to 9:47 tomorrow, then that is 24 hours. I've completed my first 24 hours. And that was a great way to start thinking about it, that the day isn't done for just because, like, I said 9:47 in the morning. I had already messed up by 9:47 in the morning and I was ready to write off that entire day. And if I hadn't stopped, if I hadn't asked myself, well, if I hadn't been watching that video or that movie, then I would have never thought, hey, I can break this down into smaller increments. I can think of my day differently. This one is really important. Stop thinking that you're never going to make a mistake again. And I say that, and even saying it sounds kind of silly, right? Because I'm like, oh, I'm never going to make a mistake again. But how many times have I told myself that? How many times have I fallen off the wagon and tried to get back on, and then I'm like, this is it. This is going to be the time. This time I'm going to do it perfect. I'm never going to binge again. I'm never going to have these problems again. I basically set myself up to fail because, you know what? I'm a human being. I am going to make mistakes. And when you are doing something, especially something new, it's okay to make a mistake. What really matters is not that you made a mistake, but how much effort or how quickly you try to fix that mistake. I know I'm going to make mistakes again, especially when it comes to dieting, because when I look at my track history with dieting is terrible. And the point of this is to do things differently. And so what I'm doing differently, instead of telling myself I'm never going to make a mistake again, is to understand that mistakes will happen, and I'm not going to put that heavy burden of perfection on myself by telling myself that mistakes are not going to happen. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it meal by meal, because when we say we're going to never make a mistake again, that is like saying I am committed to this forever. And being committed to something, especially a diet, when you have spent a lot of time either binge eating or something like that, like I talked about food envy before, and food envy is really real. But when you say you're never going to do that again, it just makes you want to do it more. And so the mindset shift that I am going to make this time is to tell myself, this isn't forever, but could this be for a meal? And you know what? Maybe I can't stick to carnivore. Maybe I can't stick to the diet that I choose forever. But if I ask myself, can I stick to it for one more meal? Can I stick to it for today? That is completely different from saying, I'm never gonna make a mistake again. This is it. I'm in it for life. And thinking of it that way allows you to give yourself more grace, allows there to be less pressure on yourself, it basically just allows you to work through things as they come. And working through things as they come, I think the more I allow myself to do it, the better I think it is, because it allows me to build trust in myself. And so I am working on it case by case. And when things come up, I can handle it. I can work through it. I can stick to it one more meal. Think of your triggers. I know this one might sound a little counterproductive because you want to avoid your triggers. You don't want your triggers to mess you up. And that is how I have thought for a long time. I have thought, if I don't even think about pizza, I don't even think about Chinese food, if I don't think about the things I want, I don't think about the things that make me want to binge, I don't think about the situations in which I binge the most, then I will do better. And that way of thinking, just when I think that way and the situation comes up, I'm not prepared. When I went on that mini vacation that derailed everything, that like totally made me fall off the dieting bandwagon and like roll down the hill and like, all this stuff and eat whatever I wanted. When I was in that situation, I was not prepared for it. When you think about your triggers or the obstacles that you might face, it allows you to mentally prepare before you enter the situation. You shouldn't underestimate mental preparedness. So our brains are wonderful things. The thing is, we teach our brains how to react in a situation. We tell our brains that when you encounter this problem, this is what you should do. And so when I say you should think about your triggers, think about them. Imagine them. How would things have gone differently if instead of going to the hotel at a place where I know I historically binge and just entered into that situation versus I sat and I actually gave it some thought and I worked through it in my mind and was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But I really only gave it, you know what, I should probably do this. And that was a mistake because rehearsing things in your brain over and over and over can change the way you act in a situation. Because our brains, like I said, we teach them how to react. And when we rehearse something, even if it's mentally, it's training our brain that when we encounter that situation, this is the way we should act. This is important, especially when you are getting back on track. I know that historically I have always wanted to avoid my triggers. I have not wanted to think about them. And I think that is one of my biggest hangups because by avoiding them, I was never prepared for them. And so habits, especially when you are doing something new, you cannot live in a bubble. Like your diet, you can avoid going out to eat. You can avoid, dining with friends. You can avoid certain foods. You can make sure they don't come into your house. You can do all these things. These are all things that I've heard recommended and they help. But preparing yourself mentally is more important because you're not going to be able to avoid going out with your friends forever. Those holiday parties, they're going to come again. Like those foods, as much as you want to keep them out of the house, if you don't live by yourself, they are going to find their way in because you have children, you have a husband, you have roommates, you have all these things, and there's the possibility you are going to be faced with that food again. If you rehearse what you are going to do when you are faced with that situation, then you will be prepared when you are actually in that situation. The next on the list is to find a way to be accountable. And that might sound really easy. It might sound straightforward, but I found in my personal life that it's not really that cut and dry. The type of accountability I need at different times in my life has been different. So I thought that when I created these videos, it was going to be a type of accountability that would help me stay on track. And you know what? If that was the case, I wouldn't be making a video talking about how I need to get back on track or how I have struggled or what I have learned from failure. I wouldn't need to be making those videos because I would have been motivated and I would have been accountable to keep going. And so what we need for accountability will look different depending on where you are in life, like how you accept accountability. Like for my husband, telling somebody and having somebody expecting him to do it works for him. That allows him to be accountable. And he's like, oh, they're counting on me. But just telling somebody something that I'm going to do something or having them expect me to do it, it doesn't really help with me. So my accountability actually came from somewhere unexpected. My son we had registered my son for a karate class. And as part of this karate class, he had a graduation. We attended it. It was great. He broke a board and I was like super proud of him. And I was like, this is awesome. And my husband, who had always wanted to do karate with my son, was like, well, why don't we look into doing karate? And so they were offering this deal that if we signed up that day, we got such a percentage off. And the greatest thing about this gym was that if you signed up 2 people, your entire family got karate for the year. Like if you paid for the year for 2 people, everybody in your family got it regardless of how big your family was, which I thought was super cool. But that also meant that I could take karate if I wanted to, not without any other strings attached. And so that first karate class, oh my gosh, I felt terrible. I felt out of shape. I felt like I got out of breath really easily. I felt sweaty really easy. And like, that may sound daunting. If I felt like that, I don't think I would ever go to karate class again. But for me, so historically, I love sports. I love participating in sports, but I don't like feeling like I don't know what I'm doing, or like I'm out of shape, or like I can't participate to the level that I want. And so I found feeling like that motivating. I was like, well, you know what? I should get back on my diet. I should find a way to have better endurance. I should find a way to be more flexible. And I better definitely practice push-ups, because those were pretty pathetic. And so like being in that situation, in that environment that felt more like a team, that felt more like a sport, I wanted to be able to participate better. And so that was motivating for me. And knowing that my husband and son were also taking a class and that it was already paid for, like that was like built-in accountability. Like I want to get better so that next class I go to, I can breathe a little easier. I'm a little more flexible. I don't suck so bad at push-ups. And so that type of accountability worked for me. So it's all about finding the type of accountability that will work for you and putting yourself in the situation where you can be accountable. Stay full. I know this is classic advice and that people will talk about staying full over and over, but I actually have a specific way that I want to go about staying full, because you can go about staying full any number of ways. I historically have been a snacker. I call it grazing. I would put something on the table and I would eat a little bit all day. And I would think about, well, what am I going to have next? And so I spent a majority of the day thinking about food. And one of my goals in being on this diet is to not think about food as much. And that means that instead of having a snack, which I always eat just to get me by, just enough to get to the next snack, to the next meal, I want to think of it as having larger meals that are more satisfying and more filling. The reason for that is I just don't want to think about food as much, because the more you think about food, the more you want to eat food. And that is a situation I want to avoid, is eating food that I do not intend to eat, because that's what ends up happening when I think about food all the time, is like, oh, I start thinking about foods that I shouldn't be having. And once I start thinking about foods that I shouldn't be having, I go down that rabbit hole where I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have those. Oh, but I really want to. This feels too restricting. I feel too restrained. When am I going to be able to have these foods again? Why do I have to stick to this diet? Yeah. So it goes like that. And so I guess instead of thinking of this tip as staying full, I want to think of it as I'm reducing the amount of time that I have to think about food. And as somebody who is a binge eater, I think that that's one of the biggest things that I can do to help myself stick to any diet, no matter what it is, carnivore, keto, whatever diet is to figure out a way to decrease the amount of time I have to think about food. Thank you for listening to my tips that I am implementing to help me get back on my diet and to stick to my diet. So a lot of these tips are different than the conventional tips. They have to do with shifting your mindset, because what I have found is that just jumping into it without trying to think about it, without working through the mental problems and the emotional problems I have revolving around eating, has not worked for me in the past. I know these are not the conventional stick to your diet tips that you are used to getting, but I have heard all of those diet tips before. I have heard, hey, drink more water. Hey, eat more snacks. Hey, do all of these things. And you know what? None of those things have really helped me. And the component that I think is often left out is that we need to work on where we are mentally and what we are capable of if we want to be able to stick to something. And so that's why my tips and tricks this time look a little different than the conventional diet tips. If you enjoyed these tips, please leave me a comment below. If you have tried something that has helped you stick to a diet, I would love to hear it, because I'm always looking for something that will help me and help make this journey easier. Thank you. My name is Echo, and I'll talk to you next time. Okay, bye.